In this module, we turn our attention to the consumer. Food production is consumer-driven. Food supply is influenced by consumer demand, and thus ultimately the cost of food production and food consumption is driven by consumers. And we've talked a lot about producers and scientists. What are some of the key issues or concerns of consumers?
Okay, let's reduce this to looking at Illinois, right? And we think of 150 years. We were mostly a rural society 150 years ago. A lot of people on the farms, a lot of people probably producing their own food, right? Now we are, and us as an institution, we address those producers, right? And that's society, right? That was society then. And then now we're, 150 years later, we're mostly an urban society. We as an institution, we address the issues of production still, but that audience is a lot smaller. Very important because we still, in Illinois, we manage 24 to 27 million acres of land year after year, right? So we need to pay attention to that and continue to address those issues. Now, what's the other component is that now the person that makes a decision is the consumer, right? And that's what now is mostly an urban consumer, that makes a decision and wants to know about how food is produced, what are the benefits that food has for health, and how is the impact of production systems, right, to the environment, right? And I think consumers have concerns about where food comes from, how it's produced, what's the effect, not only in the environment, obviously for climate change, but there are other issues like what are we doing with wildlife, right? How to address issues of water quality. And I think I see all those things as opportunities as agronomists, as the College of Agriculture. Because I think that we can address all of those issues, and farmers are addressing a lot of those issues. So.
My research is about the economics of sustainable agriculture and food systems. And so thinking about, because it's systems, it gets me involved in both the consumer side of things, the producer, the farming side of things, and what goes in between, especially when we're thinking about making mainstream systems more localized or more regionalized. So it starts from one to the other, but I do have a heavier focus on the production aspects and so the sustainability of production and farming practices. But this is so connected with what consumers want. And so even if I want to focus on the production aspect, I always end up having to look at consumer preferences to understand whether, say, there's a practice that's going to be more sustainable, but it's going to cost the farmer more. Who's going to pick up the bill? Is it going to be the consumer? Is it going to be a policy incentive? So it ends up branching into both policy and consumer aspects as well.
We're really good at forecasting populations. It turns out that that's not the hardest thing to do. And I don't mean we can guess exactly the number of people, but we can watch the pattern for China and we recognize that at some point the number of people will actually come down. And China's a sixth of the world or a little more, India likewise, and if you were to put a map together of the world's population, it's very, very predictable. And where people live is very, very predictable. And where soils exist is very, very predictable. And where we have water resources is fairly predictable. What we don't know is how much food people will eat based on their ability to buy food. And as people's income goes up, a couple of things happens. Longevity goes up because you eat more and have better health care. So Nigeria, as a part of the world, a lot of people are predicting will exceed the US population sometime in the middle of this century, very likely. But it's for a lot of reasons. When your income goes up, you eat better food, and when your diet goes up, your longevity goes up. But when your income goes up and you eat better food, it means you have to produce more, not proportional to the population.
Researchers analyzed the price of food products and the cost of production. They also analyze the demands of consumers and the influence of that consumer demand on the economy. They also take a closer look at consumers in general, their preferences, their wants, their needs around food, and finally, their everyday decisions around food.
What foods people want access to and why. And so, you know, if it's because of like nutritional guidelines, for example, like how do you stay on top of what the nutritional guidance is and how you can best adhere to it. So people, and myself included, you know, like when we have our busy schedules and like meal planning or prepping isn't something that we might be particularly good at or have experience with, just having access to the resources to do things with the food that is available or accessible. So people are like, oh, maybe I won't buy this because I don't know how to store it properly, or it rots too quickly and I need stuff that's on the go and that's prepackaged in a different way. So those sort of limiting factors might have to do with how we're actually able to take the guidance and apply it in our own lives in ways that are also specific to our own sort of metabolic needs and considerations of health and things like that.
Health is such, and nutrition is such a salient value and kind of concern right now. That is often central to how people, the kind of anxieties that people have around their food practices. But I would say kind of alongside that, you know, especially within the context, say, of poverty and income inequality, right? Concerns about not being able to have enough food to be able to feed oneself and one's family, right? That's a very, you know, crucial concern and one that is still, you know, highly salient for, you know, a good chunk of Americans still today. So that's another one. I would say another concern that folks have is just change, kind of, and how to adapt to change. You know, like as I was kind of referring to before, I mean, food is a way to connect us to our past, right? To our histories, to our ancestors. You know, eating the same foods that those that came before us ate is a way to kind of ground yourself and your identity and your community and your family, right? But at the same time, you know, within the context of, say, of families or communities even, people have different ideas about the extent to which food practices should change, and they always are going to be changing to some extent. It's a very dynamic thing. But so that can kind of be a source of conflict, particularly, say, between parents and children, especially intergenerationally. That's another concern for sure.
So I think what's important, though, is that suppose you eat a calorie that came from a plant. Well, then you got a calorie. But if you give that calorie to a chicken, it takes 3 calories to get a calorie back for human consumption. If you give it to pigs, you need maybe 9 calories or so to get a calorie back for human consumption. Beef maybe 12, 13, dairy 12, 15, something. But the number of calories you have to take from plants, and again, the only real solar collector in the world is a plant. And so if you take calories from a plant and multiply them up for our quality of diet that we might choose if we get more money, I want to produce calories now to feed the things that are feeding people instead of to feed people. That multiplication of calorie potential is astounding. So instead of eating rice or cassava or something as a first elemental calorie from the plant, if I now want to eat more pork and more chicken and more dairy and more cheese, then I have to maybe grow 9 times as many calories for that calorie you eventually produce. And if instead of living to be 62, you now live to be 72, and instead of 72 to 92, and instead of 92 to 116 at some point due to healthcare, the per person impact on the food system has scaled up in a very dramatic way. That's very good for U.S. agriculture, by the way. But it's a big, big challenge to organize that without fighting about today's particular question.
In this segment, we highlighted some concerns around food and food choices that are ultimately more than just financial decisions. Convenience, comfort, desires, access and affordability are all decision points for consumers when it comes to food. Population growth, income disparities, and caloric priorities or preferences are all connected in this complex consumer web and influence our ability to produce high-quality, nutritious food for all humans on the planet.